I did not wake that morning knowing I would become a woman capable of murder. I woke knowing only this, that loving him in silence had begun to rot something inside me, and rot, once it starts, does not stop politely. It spreads. It softens what should be firm. It makes decisions for you while you still believe you are choosing. I had loved him longer than anyone suspected. Longer than even I was willing to admit. In a frontier town like ours, where people learn to read faces the way they read the weather, silence was the only place love could hide. And I hid it well. Too well. By the time I understood what my quiet devotion had become, the truth had already sharpened itself into something with teeth. They will say later that it was jealousy. That it was madness. That it was a woman scorned. Let them say it. Words are lighter than blood. What they will never understand is this: I did not want him simply because he was kind or handsome or strong. I wanted him because he made the world feel survivable. And when I realized I could not have him, I understood something else just as clearly: I could not survive the world where he belonged to someone else. Welcome to First West Stories. Stories of our fathers. If you love our frontier legends and ancestors, drop a comment, like, share it with a friend, and subscribe. Most of all, stay till the very end. The wildest part is always waiting there. The town of Red Willow lay pressed between hills and timber, a place built not by hope but by endurance. It smelled of pine smoke, sweat, horses, and unfinished prayers. People came there to start over or to disappear. Some managed both. The land around us was wide and unforgiving, the kind of wilderness that watched human drama with ancient indifference. That was where I first saw him. Jonah Cole did not arrive like a man meant to be noticed. He rode in with his head slightly bowed, coat worn thin at the elbows, dust clinging to his boots as though it had followed him out of loyalty. He had the look of someone who had learned to keep moving not because he wanted to, but because stopping hurt more. I noticed him anyway. At first, my affection was harmless. A glance held a moment too long. A thought that lingered after he passed. I told myself it would fade, that frontier crushes were like frontier storms, sudden, loud, and gone by morning. But this one stayed. It stayed through seasons. Through silence. Through opportunity one never took. I watched him help repair fences that weren't his. I watched him laugh with other men, the sound rough but honest. I watched him look at women with polite disinterest, and each time, I told myself that meant something. It did not. She arrived in spring. Her name was Eliza Moore, and she came with the thaw, when the land softened and men began to believe again in gentler futures. She did not seek attention either, which made her dangerous in ways she never understood. She spoke quietly. She listened. She carried herself as though she had already lost something precious and survived the loss. Jonah noticed her immediately. I saw it in the way his posture changed, the way his eyes followed her without meaning to. I saw the curiosity bloom, slow and reluctant, like something he did not trust yet but wanted to. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself many lies that spring. Eliza worked at the trading post, kept mostly to herself. We were not friends. We were not enemies. We existed in parallel, close enough to feel the warmth of the same fire, far enough to pretend we did not see one another. She did not know what I felt. I am certain of that. If she had, she might have been afraid of me, or kinder than I deserved. Jonah began finding reasons to visit the trading post. I told myself this still did not mean anything. Love, when left unspoken, becomes something else entirely. It does not stay pure. It grows sharp edges. It begins to feel like entitlement, like ownership earned through suffering rather than consent. I did not confess my feelings because I feared rejection, but deeper than that, I feared hearing him say her name with affection. So I waited. And while I waited, the town watched something beautiful begin. They walked together at dusk. They spoke in low voices. They laughed, heads tilted toward each other in that way people do when they forget the world exists beyond the space between them. The sight of them felt like hunger made visible. It hollowed me. I began to imagine things I had no right to imagine. What if she left? What if she died? What if fate corrected its mistake? I was ashamed of those thoughts. At least, at first. Summer came hard and fast. The land grew wild, tall grass hiding snakes, heat pressing down like a hand on the back of the neck. Tempers shortened. Secrets grew heavier. And my silence, my damned, cowardly silence, became unbearable. I remember the night I finally understood what I was capable of. There was a dance at the edge of town, music carried by fiddles and too much hope. I stood near the back, watching Jonah and Eliza move together, clumsy but smiling, as though they had discovered something sacred by accident. Someone brushed past me and laughed. Someone spilled a drink. Life continued. Something inside me broke cleanly then, like a bone snapped without warning. I left before the music ended. I walked into the dark, the wilderness welcoming me without question. The trees did not judge. The wind did not ask why I shook. Somewhere between the town lights and the tree lean, I whispered the words out loud for the first time, not as a threat, but as a truth that terrified me with its clarity. I want him to myself, I said. And if I can't have him, I added, breath trembling, we all are good as dead. The words did not echo. They settled. By morning, Red Willow would look the same. Jonah would still smile at Eliza. People would still believe in ordinary endings. But something had already shifted, unseen and irreversible, like a trap set beneath fresh snow. I had loved him in silence. Now silence would love me back, cruelly, completely, and demand payment. The morning after the dance, I awoke with the taste of smoke in my mouth, not from fire, but from the way my thoughts had burned all night. I had walked the hills around Red Willow, pacing along the timberline, imagining every possible scenario. I imagined Jonah noticing the change in me, imagined Eliza's bright laughter turning to screams. I imagined the mountains themselves pressing in, listening, weighing judgment on my shoulders. And somewhere, deep in the pit of my chest, a curious satisfaction stirred. Fear and desire intertwined. They always did. I did not speak to anyone that morning. Not the baker, not the blacksmith, not the children running barefoot across the street with laughter that seemed foreign to my ears. The town felt smaller than usual, narrower, constricting. It was as if the world knew I had made a silent promise and was now watching, waiting to see if I would keep it. Jonah appeared at the trading post that afternoon. I had followed him with my eyes since dawn, pretending to fuss with flour sacks, smoothing dust from shelves that hadn't needed smoothing. He carried a package of supplies for Eliza, a small token, he would call it later, and his eyes caught mine for a fleeting moment. In that instant, the air thickened. I could not read his expression, could not know if he sensed the storm brewing in me. Perhaps he did not. Perhaps he was incapable. That was part of my frustration, the part that gnawed away at me quietly, making each heartbeat a hammer against reason. Eliza arrived minutes later, her skirts brushing the floorboards as she stepped in, the bell above the door ringing a fragile warning. She moved with the grace of someone untouched by the rough edges of frontier life, even though she had endured winters colder than most of us would survive. She smiled at Jonah, unaware of me, unaware of the shadow coiling silently behind her. I hated her. I hated her and I envied her. I wanted the world to narrow so that only I and Jonah existed. And when that was impossible, I felt a darkness curl into the space where mercy should have lived. I lingered in the corner of the store, forcing myself to appear occupied, to count sacks of flour and measure lengths of rope. My eyes darted between them like a hawk in the sky, sharp, calculating, waiting for a misstep. Jonah laughed, soft but unguarded. Eliza laughed, a higher sound that clipped at the edges of my sanity. My fingers itched for action, for control, for some gesture that would make the world acknowledge what my heart had known for years, that he was mine, and the rest of existence was expendable. Weeks passed like this, measured in stolen glances, overheard words, and quiet plotting. I learned the rhythms of Jonah's life, when he would leave for the creek, when he would return, how his moods shifted like weather fronts over the Rockies. I learned Eliza's schedule too, noting her solitary walks through the hills, the way she collected herbs near the riverbanks, the gentle strength she carried that made me both furious and desperate. I began to chart their movements in my journal, a small, leather-bound companion that became a mirror to my obsession. Each entry was precise, the hour, the location, the observable behavior, and my own heart's response, which had grown dangerous, unpredictable. It was during one of these long observations that I first began to envision what might be called intervention. At first, it was subtle. I imagined accidents, a misstep near a cliff, a stray horse startled by a sudden noise, a wagon wheel giving way. Nothing permanent, nothing cruel beyond what the land might naturally deliver. Yet, even in these fantasies, I felt a thrill. A forbidden anticipation that made my chest tighten and my stomach churn. The frontier is a place where death is ordinary, yet these thoughts were different. These were deliberate, calculated. These were mine. One evening, Jonah and Eliza walked along the ridge above Red Willow, far enough from town that their voices carried faintly to me. I hid behind a cluster of pines, breath shallow, heart racing. He spoke of futures, of dreams I could never articulate without shame, and she laughed, soft and easy, the sound twisting something cruel inside me. I wanted to call out, to scream, to make him turn and look at me, to recognize my presence and understand the danger of ignoring it. But I remained silent. I had learned that silence could be louder than words. Silence could bend the world to one's will. The days stretched long and oppressive. The mountains seemed to notice my agitation. Winds whispered through the trees, carrying nothing but the scent of pine and decay. Nights were darker than they should have been, stars obscured by cloud banks that moved with unnatural speed. I began to hear things in the distance, a footstep not my own, the crack of a branch, the soft murmur of voices when none should exist. I told myself it was imagination. Perhaps it was. Perhaps the wilderness had begun to mirror the chaos inside me. Then the first body appeared. It was a man I barely knew, a drifter passing through Red Willow, the kind of person who vanishes into the timber for days without leaving a trace. His wagon had overturned near the creek, his rifle discharged accidentally, or so the town would later claim. But I knew better. I had been there, lying in wait behind a thicket of pines, watching the world bend under my own thoughts. I did not touch him. I only observed. But the thrill, the understanding that life and death were malleable if one dared, left me breathless. From that night forward, my plans grew bolder. I followed Jonah's route to the river, noting where he might stray too far, where Eliza's path intersected with the wild. I mapped escape routes, hiding spots, natural hazards, every crevice, every slope, every bend in the river became a tool or a weapon in my mind. The obsession became tangible, like a coiled snake beneath my ribs, ready to strike when necessary. I realized then that I had passed a threshold. There was no turning back. Desire had hardened into determination. Passion had fused with rage. The first real test came in July, when a storm swept through the valley, wind lashing against rooftops, rain carving gullies into the hills. Jonah and Eliza sought shelter near the riverbank, under a fallen tree that offered minimal protection. I followed, keeping far enough to be unseen, close enough to sense the tension between them. Lightning fractured the sky. Thunder roared like a god angered. And in that chaos, I imagined myself stepping forward, letting the storm choose my instrument of judgment. I did not. Not yet. There was a fascination in watching, in feeling the threads of fate tighten around them while I remained unseen, undetected. Every glance they exchanged, every word they spoke, became ammunition in my mind, shaping the plan I would someday need to execute. The frontier had given me patience. Obsession taught me precision. And the wilderness, indifferent, eternal, gave me cover. It was during this period that the first tremor of doubt crept in. Late at night, alone in the cabin I had claimed as my own refuge, I would stare at the fire and wonder if the path I had chosen would destroy me along with them. Obsession, I realized, is a double-edged blade. It promises satisfaction but delivers consequences. I imagined Jonah and Eliza safe, smiling, untouched, and for a terrifying moment, I felt regret, an echo of humanity that my desire tried to smother. But the thought was fleeting. Desire is relentless. And mine was older, stronger, and more enduring than conscience. By midsummer, Red Willow had grown restless. Rumors of a hidden observer began circulating. Townspeople whispered of a shadow seen in the timberline, of strange noises after dark. Jonah laughed them off. Eliza smiled politely, unaware that their safety depended on my silence and cunning. The thrill of being unseen became addictive. The line between love and malice blurred until I could no longer discern which motivated me more. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps it was neither. Perhaps it did not matter. One night, the culmination of weeks of careful planning presented itself. Jonah and Eliza had decided to camp along the upper river, a place rarely visited by townsfolk. I followed silently, through thick brush and under low-hanging branches, each step calculated, measured. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows that flickered across my path. My pulse was steady. My resolve was absolute. The wilderness watched. And I, for the first time, felt the true weight of what obsession demanded. I stood there, in the clearing, just beyond the bend, and whispered my intent to the night, I want him. All of him. And if I cannot, then nothing else matters. The words were a vow. They were truth. They were danger made flesh. The wind carried them away. The night Jonah and Eliza camped along the river should have been ordinary. The kind of night where the water lapped softly at the banks, and the wind whispered through pine needles like some gentle lullaby. But in the frontier, ordinary does not exist. At least, not for those whose hearts carry obsession like a brand. I had followed them under the cloak of darkness, moving through brush so thick it tore at my clothing and drew blood from my hands. My breaths came shallow, measured, my pulse a drum of warning and exhilaration. I watched from the shadows, my rifle cradled in my arms, my mind alive with visions both tender and terrible. Every movement they made was poetry to me, a performance I could neither applaud nor touch. And yet, I wanted to intervene, to redirect the currents of fate in a way only I could comprehend. Jonah was seated on a fallen log, whittling a small piece of pine, while Eliza knelt nearby, tending a tiny fire. The glow of the embers painted her face in shades of gold and shadow. She did not notice the subtle tension in Jonah's expression, the way his eyes strayed to the woods beyond as though he sensed danger he could not name. I did. I had spent months reading him, predicting him, learning the patterns that would make him predictable. A sudden rustle startled me. I froze, pressing myself against the trunk of a fir. Somewhere, a branch snapped beneath the weight of some small animal, or perhaps a larger one. The wilderness had its own predators, and I had learned to distinguish their steps from my own. Still, a thrill ran down my spine, because in that moment I recognized something undeniable. I was no longer the observer. My presence had weight. My intent could alter the course of everything. I had waited too long. Obsession has a limit, and mine had been reached in the silent hours, in the slow-burning heat of jealousy. I lifted my rifle and aimed it, sighting carefully between the tree trunks, imagining the sound of the shot carrying across the valley. My finger hovered over the trigger. I imagined Jonah's startled glance, the way his hand would instinctively reach for mine, even if the bullet never left the barrel. And then I imagined Eliza, bright, laughing, unaware, collapsing into the river's shadowed banks. The shot never came. I hesitated. Something within me, a fragment of who I once had been, recoiled. But hesitation did not save them. Fate, it seems, moves faster than morality. A man stumbled into the clearing from the opposite bank. He was not one I had seen before. Cloaked in shadow, he carried a rifle and the kind of confidence only strangers bring into a place where they are not known. His steps were deliberate, and as he approached, I recognized the wrongness immediately. He had come with intent, though I could not yet discern whose side he was on. Jonah rose, hand going instinctively for the rifle lying across the log. Eliza froze, firelight trembling across her face. I stepped back, heart hammering, mind a tangle of fear and exhilaration. The stranger's eyes found Jonah first, then me. His mouth opened, words slipping into the cold night, and in an instant, the fragile veil of civility shattered. Shots rang out. The first struck near Jonah's shoulder, spinning him backward. The second missed entirely, clanging against stone with an angry echo. Eliza screamed, leaping toward him, pulling him close as I tried to decide whether to intervene or retreat. The wilderness was alive with danger, each sound amplified, each movement carrying consequence. My instincts screamed, act or lose control entirely. I fired. The rifle cracked, sending a bullet into the ground near the stranger's feet. He faltered, cursing, and turned toward the riverbank where I had been concealed. Jonah scrambled to his feet, but not quickly enough. Another shot rang out. Jonah's chest caught it, shallow, not mortal, but enough to topple him to one knee. Eliza screamed again, this time pressing her body against his, shielding him. I saw the rage take form in her eyes. She did not know me, and yet she recognized my presence. Perhaps instinct told her I had caused the stranger's intrusion, or perhaps she merely sensed the pattern of menace. Either way, her scream carried, and with it, a power I had never anticipated. The stranger faltered, startled by the unexpected precision of my shot. He cursed again, swinging his rifle toward me, but I had already vanished into the underbrush, moving with a stealth born of months of practice. My pulse roared in my ears. I knew the terrain. I knew every rise and hollow. I could corner him, control him, bend this chaos into order. And yet, another part of me, something buried beneath the obsession, hesitated. Jonah dragged himself away from the log, blood staining his shirt, face pale with shock. He glanced at Eliza, fear and confusion mingling in his gaze. "Run," he urged her, voice ragged. "Get to town. Now." She hesitated, torn between him and the wilderness that stretched cold and indifferent beyond the firelight. I watched, heart tightening. The desire to claim him, to erase her from existence, burned hotter than ever. I imagined stepping from the shadows, seizing control, and yet the world moved too quickly. The stranger recovered, rifle leveled again, and chaos reigned. A shot rang out from the distance, deliberate, controlled. The stranger fell, a red stain blooming across his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. I did not see who fired. Perhaps it was chance. Perhaps it was fate. But the moment fractured the night. Jonah collapsed fully now, leaning against a tree as Eliza pulled him toward the river's edge. I remained hidden, breathless, the rifle trembling in my hands. Silence followed. Only the river whispered against stone. Only the wind pressed through the pines. Only my pulse threatened to betray me. Days passed afterward in a haze of fevered activity. Red Willow was unsettled. Rumors swirled of a shootout along the riverbank. Jonah and Eliza returned, bruised but alive. The town whispered of frontier justice, of luck, of divine intervention. No one suspected me, not yet. Not one soul suspected that the shadow watching from the tree lean had orchestrated, imagined, and almost executed a plan that could have ended both their lives. I stayed close but unseen, a silent predator cloaked in social civility. I observed their recovery, Eliza tending to Jonah's wounds, the softness in her voice, the way he leaned on her as though the river, the shots, the wilderness itself had rendered him fragile. Each moment was a dagger to me. Every tender glance, every whispered word was a confirmation of my failure, or perhaps a challenge. Nightmares began. I saw Jonah and Eliza trapped in the river, dragged apart by unseen hands, drowning in snow and shadow. I dreamed of their screams echoing in the hills, of my own hands stained with blood I could not wash away. My obsession had not abated. It had grown more cunning, more precise. By the end of the week, I had mapped every conceivable route of escape, every location where confrontation might occur, every spot where wilderness could conceal or reveal. My journal became thicker, filled with diagrams, sketches, and careful notes. It was no longer about observation alone. It was about control. It was about justice, as I saw it, administered by my own hands. And yet, even as I planned, the weight of my conscience pressed against me. Obsession is a seductive master, but it does not erase memory. I remembered the men I had spared at the river, the first life I had almost taken. I remembered the rustle in the trees, the feel of the rifle in my hands, the strange, undeniable thrill. Guilt settled in, heavy, like snow on timber, and yet desire whispered louder. One morning, Jonah spoke to me for the first time, unaware of the storm lurking behind my eyes. "You've been quiet," he said, voice casual. "Too quiet for someone who's always near." I smiled, thin and unreadable. "I've just been busy," I murmured. Busy. The lie tasted sweet on my tongue. Busy planning, watching, waiting. Busy imagining the consequences of a world in which I could act with impunity. Busy imagining the perfect moment when silence would be broken, and the law of the frontier would bend to my understanding of justice. Eliza, oblivious, continued her gentle ministrations. She could not see the danger growing around her, could not sense the web being spun by a shadow she thought harmless. And that, I realized with a shiver, was the cruelest part. I could destroy them completely and still remain unseen. By midsummer, the first irreversible actions would come. A single mistake, a single moment of panic, and the fragile balance between life, love, and death would snap. And when it did, I knew that there would be no going back. Because in the wilderness of Red Willow, desire is a force as powerful as snow-laden trees, as relentless as the river carving valleys from rock. And when obsession meets opportunity, judgment waits like a predator, silent and inevitable. The day dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself had heard the whispered promise I had made months ago and pressed its weight against me. I could not stay in Red Willow. Not after what had almost happened along the riverbank, not after the thrill and the shame coiled together in my chest. Every glance from Jonah, every laugh of Eliza, felt like a blade slicing through the fragile veil of control I had maintained. I packed lightly, the rifle, the journal, a few rations of hard bread and salted meat. I did not look back. Not at the town, not at the hills, not even at the river that had witnessed the first echoes of my intent. The wilderness awaited, and it did not forgive mistakes. Its silence was absolute, its judgment impartial. It had already seen what I was capable of, and it had not intervened. That, I realized, was worse than punishment. That meant it understood. The first hours of flight were uneventful. I moved through timber and brush, careful to leave no tracks, careful to use every shadow, every hollow, every slope to my advantage. My mind raced. Jonah would eventually notice my absence. Eliza would fear for him. The townspeople would suspect nothing at first, then slowly, like water seeping into rock, suspicion would spread. And I would be waiting, always just beyond their sight. But the wilderness is never truly neutral. It observes. It tests. It demands. Within a mile of leaving Red Willow, I stumbled into a ravine, hidden beneath years of leaves and pine needles. The fall jarred my shoulder and scraped my leg, but I was alive. The air tasted of wet earth and iron, and I pressed on, each step deliberate, calculating, aware that miscalculation could be fatal. Behind me, I imagined them. Jonah would eventually organize a search. Eliza would cling to hope. The town would follow. And I would be forced to act, to move beyond thought into the realm of reality where consequences were absolute. My heartbeat quickened at the anticipation. Survival demanded cunning. Desire demanded ruthlessness. And I had both in abundance. The first confrontation came near an old logging trail. Jonah and two men from the town had been tracking me for hours, their progress slowed by the thick underbrush and sudden gullies. I watched from a ridge, rifle cradled, mind calculating. Jonah's eyes scanned the forest constantly, alert, haunted by a fear he could not name. He did not know it yet, but the game had already begun. I did not hesitate. I fired once, not to kill, only to warn, and the bullet thudded into a tree just behind them. Jonah dove, swearing, and the men cursed. The echoes carried across the hills like a drumbeat of dread. My pulse surged. This was no longer about love or jealousy. This was survival, sharpened to a fine edge by months of obsession. The chase began in earnest. We ran through valleys and over ridges, sometimes hours apart, sometimes glimpsing one another through trees and mist. Hunger clawed at us, fatigue slowed our limbs, yet adrenaline carried us forward. I felt the wilderness pressing in, pushing me, testing me. I was faster than I had known. My plans were precise, learned from months of observation, yet each misstep reminded me that the frontier does not forgive. At night, I rested in hollows, listening. Jonah's voice sometimes carried faintly, calling for me, pleading for an explanation I could not give. Eliza's voice, soft and persistent, reached me once, carried by the wind across a ridge. My chest tightened. Desire and rage intertwined. I could have revealed myself, admitted my obsession, begged him to understand, and yet the thought disgusted me. Silence was power. Silence was protection. Silence was the only thing that made me whole. The first real turning point came when we reached the cliffs above the canyon. The edge was jagged, treacherous, and the wind shrieked like the screams of those long past. Jonah stumbled, slipping slightly, and I froze, torn between letting nature execute judgment or intervening. The choice made itself. He caught himself. But in that moment, I realized the chase was no longer merely physical. It had entered the realm of psychology, where fear and anticipation were weapons just as deadly as rifles or knives. I used that knowledge mercilessly. I left small signs, broken branches, footprints meant to mislead, whispered sounds of movement just beyond the tree-line. Jonah and the men fell for it every time, flinching, pausing, reassessing. The wilderness became my ally, reshaping paths, hiding my presence, amplifying my control. And yet, with each small victory, a shadow of guilt crept in. I had begun to kill not in deed but in spirit. Every moment of terror I imposed on them was a violation of the humanity I still carried, faint though it was. Days passed like this. The townsfolk abandoned the chase in frustration, believing the wilderness had swallowed me whole. Jonah and Eliza persisted, guided by stubborn hope and love. I observed them from distance, hidden, my chest tight with longing and hatred. They did not see me. They did not suspect the depth of my obsession. And that, I realized, was the cruelest pleasure of all. But no plan survives contact with reality, and the wilderness has a way of correcting arrogance. On the fifth night, a sudden storm descended. Rain turned the trails to mud, the river swelled, and visibility dropped to mere feet. Jonah and Eliza were separated by the darkness, and I stumbled on a root, twisting my ankle. Pain shot through my leg, a reminder that obsession cannot shield one from nature's judgment. I was trapped, vulnerable, yet still unseen. The wind carried a sound, a scream. Eliza. My heart hammered. I wanted to rush, to act, to seize control. But the mud sucked at my boots, and the river roared between me and her. My rage boiled. Desire became desperation. I had wanted her gone, I had wanted him for myself, and now the wilderness mocked me with its indifference. It was then I realized the true cost. This chase, this obsession, had begun as a private torment but now threatened to consume everything. The mountains had become a judge, jury, and executioner. My choices had consequences I had not fully understood. I had become part of the story I had plotted so meticulously, and there was no escape from the wilderness or from the reckoning it demanded. Night fell fully. I made camp in a hollow, shivering and soaked, mind racing. I wrote in my journal, hands trembling. The mountain's judge. The river's witness. Obsession is a fire that burns everything in its path. And yet, I cannot stop. I will not stop. Desire and destruction are intertwined. The chase is not over. I am not over. By morning, Jonah had regrouped. He had found Eliza, bruised but alive, and together they moved with renewed purpose, tracking me with a determination born of fear and love combined. I watched from a distance, body aching, mind taut. The chase had entered its final phase. One misstep could mean death, for one of us, maybe all of us. The wilderness closed in. Canyons narrowed, timber thickened, cliffs loomed. I felt the weight of my obsession, the pressure of judgment, and the inevitability of violence. And in that moment, a strange calm settled over me. I had wanted them. I had wanted control. Now, the frontier itself demanded that I reckon with the consequences of loving too deeply, thinking too silently, acting too late. The next step, I knew, would define everything, murder or mercy. Justice or destruction. Desire or survival. And the wilderness would decide along with me, impartial and eternal, a witness to the obsession that had begun quietly in the shadows of Red Willow months ago. The dawn broke cold and gray over the hills of Red Willow, casting a pale light over a wilderness that had grown silent, thick with tension and grief. I had watched Jonah and Eliza struggle through the night, the mud and rain chasing them as relentlessly as my own obsession had chased them through the forests and cliffs. Every movement they made was a reminder, painfully sharp, that my plans, my desires, my fantasies of possession, were no longer mine to wield. They had taken on a life of their own, wild and unpredictable, just like the mountains around us. I had never imagined it would come to this. Not the way the wild whispers of the Rockies would judge me. Not the way a single act, one misstep in the tangled underbrush, could unravel the fragile strands of life I had spent months studying, obsessing over, coveting. My heart pounded as I followed them from a distance, shadows of pine and stone hiding me, the rifle clutched like an extension of my own body. I told myself that today, the frontier would witness the final reckoning. They paused near the edge of the canyon, both exhausted, soaked through, their breaths heavy and ragged. Jonah's hand brushed against Eliza's, not in caution but in intimacy, in life shared and survived. I felt a twist in my chest, a mix of rage, envy, and longing that nearly drove me from my hiding spot. I whispered to the wind, as though it could deliver my words to them, "You do not belong to each other. You belong to me. And if not, none of this matters." The first shot rang out. It was mine. I had aimed carefully, taking a position hidden among the rocks. The bullet struck the dirt near Jonah's feet, scattering pebbles, sending him sprawling backward in shock. Eliza screamed, the sound slicing through the forest like a blade. The mountains seemed to shudder, as though disapproving, as though warning me that my obsession had finally become lethal. Jonah scrambled to his feet, rifle raised, fear and disbelief in his eyes. Eliza pulled him behind a boulder, desperate, wide-eyed, searching for a way out of the nightmare I had created. I could see their terror clearly, and it thrilled me, even as something else, a deeper, more ancient part of me, recoiled in horror. The line between love and murder had blurred so completely that I could no longer tell which drove my hand. The chase resumed, but now it was different. Not playful, not strategic. It was survival. Nature itself seemed to have turned against us. Rain fell harder, thunder rolled like the anger of gods, and the paths became treacherous mudslides. Each step threatened to tip the balance. I pushed myself forward, tireless, ruthless, intent on bending fate to my will. And then, the twist of luck, or perhaps the inevitability of the wilderness, Jonah slipped on a slick patch of rock. Eliza caught him, but not fully, and they both tumbled toward the canyon edge. I froze, heart hammering, rifle trembling. The river below roared, white and violent. Time slowed. In that instant, I could have aimed again, claimed him fully, erased both their lives in one final act of obsessive triumph. And yet, I could not. Something within me, buried under months of desire and hatred, screamed. The thrill of control had reached its limit. Eliza's eyes met mine, wide with fear and disbelief. In that flash, I understood that she had known, somehow, instinctively, she had always known, the depth of my obsession. The realization hit me with a cold clarity: obsession is never private. It leaves a trail, a scent, a signature, and she had read mine perfectly. The rain fell harder, blurring the world, washing clean what the storm would not forgive. I stepped back from the edge, hands slick with mud and sweat. Jonah scrambled to safety, helped by Eliza, and for the first time, I felt the weight of my failure. Not failure in love, but failure in survival, survival of the soul. I had wanted to claim them. I had wanted to possess. And in the process, I had nearly lost myself entirely. I ran then, not toward them, not toward safety, but toward the wilderness itself. The cliffs, the trees, the river, all became my sanctuary and my prison. Hours passed in a haze of pain and exhaustion. My journal, wet with rain, fell open to the pages I had filled with obsession and plotting. I read the words and shivered. The mountains, the rivers, the wilderness, they had judged me. And I understood, finally, the sentence I had earned. The town never found my body. Not fully. They found signs of me, footprints that disappeared into the riverbank, a rifle half buried, scraps of journal pages fluttering in the wind. Rumors spread of a shadow in the woods, a ghost of obsession, a woman driven to madness by love denied. Jonah and Eliza returned to Red Willow, forever changed. They spoke little of that night, as though silence could erase what had happened. But the memory lingered, a quiet testament to the dark possibilities of desire. I wrote the last words in my journal before leaving it behind, leaning against a tree as the rain washed my tears into the mud. Obsession is a fire. It consumes everything it touches. I wanted him. I wanted her gone. And in the end, the wilderness claimed me, as it claims all who mistake desire for destiny. Remember, love is sacred, obsession is lethal, and silence can be more dangerous than any bullet. By the time the storm cleared, I had disappeared into the Rockies completely. The mountains were patient witnesses, indifferent, eternal. I understood at last that some passions cannot survive the world, and some obsessions demand the ultimate price. If this story reached you, if it lingered in your chest or made your heart beat a little faster, share it. Tell it to someone else. Stories like this, of love, obsession, and the cruel beauty of the frontier, survive because they are remembered, spoken, and felt. Sometimes the wild teaches lessons harsher than any law. Sometimes, listening is the only way to survive. If you want more Old West tales of love, betrayal, and survival, subscribe, and step quietly into the mountains. But remember, the frontier does not forgive.